What is my understanding of the word globalization? Globalization is the building and strengthening of connections across the world, and the progression towards interdependence and global cooperation. I think of it like this. Each country is painted a different color, their culture, crops, knowledge, all unique. So say Europe is blue and Asia is red, and when they began trading on the Silk Road, Europe got a little blue in Asia and a little red from Asia. And when Columbus came to the west, he got a little bluish purple in the yellow, and the process goes on until eventually everything's kind of brownish. Not to say that's necessarily a bad thing, but as every country comes into contact with another, they imprint on their culture and lifestyles. Which historical legacies of globalization do I believe have had the greatest impact on our world today? At first, I thought perhaps trade, and trading legacies have had the greatest impact. Trading on the Silk Road was the initial driving force of globalization, and the impact trade has on our economy today is huge. Although trade began relationships, what built connections wasn't the exchange of goods, but the exchange of culture. You have said that no two countries who trade with each other have fought against each other in a major war. And I believe that's not because of economic stress, but because of mutual cultural understanding. So to answer the question, I believe the cultural legacies of historical globalization have had, and continue to have, the greatest impact on our lives today. Legacies of assimilation, homogenization, apartheid, and accommodation have all shaped our culture and how it affects our day-to-day lives. The mixing of these colorful cultures has changed society and allowed nations to better understand and familiarize themselves with the rest of the world. This shared knowledge for global understanding is what opened up more opportunities for globalization. For example, when Jonas Gutenberg invented the printing press, the first thing he printed was the Bible. Copies of the Catholic religion spread across the world where anyone who knew Latin could have a deeper understanding of the religion. Some began spreading the religion, and it grew, while others began to learn Latin so they too could read the book. And more books were sent, and books were sent on science or folk tales and in different language, and this began possibilities for political negotiations, colonization, new forms of government like democracy, and education. If we look at the other end of that, countries stopped trade and boycott products in South Africa because they didn't understand or agree with the apartheid and the culture it created. I think this shows how culture can be more influential than economic wealth. If we look at present time examples, there's the red Starbucks cup headline, which clearly shows how cultural diversity is more alive than ever and how multinational companies are adapting to such a complex network. As well, we can see how legacies of assimilation and residential schools affects the First Nations and Canadian government's relationship, and how that tension can impact all Canadians. Last, my own identity has been impacted by these cultural legacies of globalization. From my Catholic religion to my Scottish ethnicity, they've all been impacted by such legacies. What aspects of economic globalization should we be most concerned about? 100%. The environment is my number one concern. We only have one Earth, and economic globalization has allowed us to increase our abilities and ambitions, making us greedier and more successful, and much more neglectful of the environment. For example, outsourcing allows us to make cheaper goods, and the jobs it brings to those countries can help their economy. So their government helps them by lifting regulations, making it cheaper for them to produce goods. This lack of regulations can be devastating to the environment. Using toxic materials, improper disposal methods of these materials, and uncensored pollution, which affects everyone who lives on Earth. This lack of rules would obviously be unacceptable in Canada, but our government cannot regulate products that are outsourced, making it quite a complex matter. Some examples of how economic needs crush the environment include in Bolivia, where water is being privatized. This was due to their economic desperation that caused them to take a loan from the IMF. So Bolivia privatized its water to be sold for profit. Only now the clean water is being used and sold, and in order to make their water and other products more competitive, there's less regulations on business and less money going towards the government to pay for services such as plumbing, meaning sewage, toxic waste, and even blood from the slaughterhouse is in the water, resulting in 208,000 1,000 people without access to clean water. Can we be both prosperous and sustainable? I believe we can be both prosperous and sustainable only if we change our definition of prosperous. Most people in the first world country view prosperity as being successful and obtaining the American dream. According to dictionary.com, a successful, flourishing, or thriving condition, especially in financial respects, good fortune. Under this definition, it is nearly impossible that 7 billion people could prosper. There is 1.8 global hectares available to each person. If we can find a way to meet our basic needs under 1.8 global hectares and change our definition of prosperity to a more spiritual definition, we could also be sustainable. This is absolutely possible, as countries like India, Africa, South Asia, Philippines, Nepal, Iraq, Vietnam, Morocco, and China have all ecological footprints under 1.8 global hectares and are able to survive on such resources. Not to say that that wouldn't be a huge adjustment to our society, but it would be a necessary one for us and future generations. What responsibilities will my generation be asked to fulfill? My generation will be asked to use the lessons from the past to create a better future. Lessons such as those from the genocide in Rwanda and Mexico, colonization in Britain, dictatorship in Germany during World War II, assimilation in Canada, apartheid in South Africa, and privatization in India and the Ukraine, as well as lessons like how to prevent such events, like the boycotts in Africa and rugby in Africa, and Gandhi in India, and the Kyoto Protocol. My generation will be asked to further globalize and increase cultural acceptance, economic prosperity, environmental sustainability, and political alliance to further develop science and technology. We will be asked to heal the wounds of the past through reconciliation and education from wounds caused by genocide, apartheid, and war. We will be asked to reform the WTO and IMF and structural adjustment programs to better represent Jamaican banana farmers and Ghana rice farmers and farmers like Lee Kung-hei, to use the Holocaust as an example so that we can better prevent genocide in Greece. My generation will be asked to build a better future for the next generation. The first quote I chose that reflects my attitudes towards globalization was "Alone we can do so little, together we can do so much" by Helen Keller. I view globalization as a force that amplifies all of our actions, both good and bad. The way we live and the way we run society has a powerful influence to countries across the world. Both the good and the bad actions are part of a much larger scale. It also means that we can do a lot more as a global community than we could as individual nations. For example, the Kyoto Protocol is a perfect example of using globalization to connect us as a team in order to allow us to take on larger tasks and have a better, more effective outcome. It also connects us through small chain reactions. For example, buying a shirt seems like such a small action, but it can affect so many lives across the world, from the crates that carried it across the oceans to the factory laborers who made it. Everything is amplified through globalization to make us a community, and as a community, we must be much more aware of the actions we take and their impact on the world. The second quote I chose is, "Arguing with globalization is like arguing against the laws of gravity" by Kofi Annan. I chose this quote because I really like how it compares globalization to gravity. In Social 10, we discuss the negative impacts of globalization a lot, and although there are a lot, I feel that globalization is a force that we cannot truly undo. We can prevent genocide and assimilation, but we can't stop people from building connections across the world, especially because of today's technology. Globalization is a natural process, and the more it unfolds and grows, the less we can do to reverse it. So all we can do is use the momentum globalization has given us to further explore the benefits and try to decrease the negatives. In the first question, I used the analogy of mixing paint. And once you change the color of a country, it can never be the same. You can't separate the paint. All you can do is continue painting, and that's Globalization by Teagan Dixon.